Senior Disciple Li's eyelids lightly shuddered as he pondered intensely, trying to decide which was the better path for him. After a short moment, his tightly closed eyes snapped open as he stared intently at the pill in Han Li's hand with a feverish gaze. Han Li did not say anything more and inserted the pill into Senior Disciple Li's mouth. The white foam around his mouth did nothing to stop him from swallowing the pill, and after it was fully ingested, Han Li slowly retracted all of the silver needles from Senior Disciple Li's body. After the retrieval of all the silver needles, the essence extraction pill began to take effect. Senior Disciple Li's pale face started to take on a reddish hue. At this moment, his body started to convulse again and his limbs started to shiver as a low drone issued from his throat. Senior Disciple Li did not want to be a laughingstock in front of Han Li, so he tried unsuccessfully to suppress his pain-filled voice. The low drone involuntarily got louder and louder as the shivers got more intense. It was only after a long period of time that the droning began to slowly subside. Finally, Senior Disciple Li recovered as his face returned to its normal, pale color, and his body stopped convulsing. This signaled that he successfully endured the last of the backlashes from consuming the essence extraction pill. Senior Disciple Li straightened his body, crossed his legs, and closed his eyes in order to enter meditation, attempting to circulate his qi to heal his injuries. Han Li found a large and clean rock nearby and sat down on it, watching Senior Disciple Li. After the time it took to eat a meal, the Senior Disciple Li, who was in a state of meditation, abruptly wrenched open his eyes and drew his saber in a flash, placing the shining blade on Han Li's neck. "Give me a reason not to kill you." Senior Disciple Li's eyes were full of coldness and filled with killing intent. "I just saved your life. Is that not a good enough reason?" Han Li stated calmly with no change to his expression except for the twitching of his brows. If one did not study Han Li's face intently, they would not have seen it. Senior Disciple Li's face slightly softened, but his eyes were still filled with killing intent as he stared at Han Li. "Before I made the decision to save you, I already guessed that you might kill me to protect your secret, but I didn't think that you would act so swiftly." Han Li bitterly laughed as his face was filled with self-mockery. "K. Despite knowing that saving you would bring calamity upon myself, I, a student of medical arts, couldn't simply sit by and watch you die." Han Li sighed. As Senior Disciple Li heard his words, his face took on a somewhat embarrassed expression, and he shifted the saber from Han Li's neck a little but did not fully remove the blade. Han Li secretly let out a breath of relief, and he continued his speech more determinedly. "You have no need to worry that I would divulge your secret. One look at my face and you would know that I'm not one to gossip. If you are still worried, I could swear a binding oath. You should be able to tell that I'm not skilled in martial arts, so if you discover that I broke my vow, you could easily kill me," Han Li calmly suggested. "Okay, swear a binding oath then," Senior Disciple Li said straightforwardly. It was only now that Han Li relaxed. Before he saved Senior Disciple Li, he could infer that Senior Disciple Li was not a cruel or viscous person, but he was not completely sure of his assessment. If he was wrong and Senior Disciple Li was a person that returned kindness with viciousness, he would only be able to defend himself with his secret life-saving method. Knowing that he would not have to use it, Han Li stealthily retracted his hand from within his robes. After Han Li swore a binding oath, Senior Disciple Li finally retracted the saber and returned it to its sheath. Han Li slightly felt a slight trace of blood on his throat, caused by the keen edge of the saber. It was sticky to the touch, and as Han Li's heartbeat returned to normal, he could feel cold sweat trickling down his back. What a close call. My evaluation prior to saving Senior Disciple Li was not comprehensive enough. I'll have to learn from this mistake to prevent my life from being in the control of someone else's hands ever again. He still had some fear lingering from this event. If there's no guarantee of my safety, I will definitely not save others in the future. Hanli decided immediately. This was the first time Hanli had saved someone, but the experience left him with a bad taste in his mouth. This event only helped to reinforce that the world was full of unexpected turnouts, and the last vestige of kindness in him was slowly being discarded away. Even though he had not turned evil, he was far from being a saint. You have saved my life and agreed to keep the matter a secret. I, Li Fiyu, owe you a big favor henceforth. As long as I'm still alive, no matter what you need help with, you can look for me. As long as I am able to accomplish the task, I will definitely help you. As he reclaimed the items that Hanli ransacked through, Senior Disciple Li stated his vow straightforwardly, using his own name as a guarantee after he fully recovered from the pill's backlash. I fear that I currently have nothing to trouble you with, but you should already have plenty of troubles, no? Hanli had a slight smile on his face as he faced Senior Disciple Li with another question. How did you know? Li Fiyu was startled and slightly lost his composure. Anyone would have easily guessed. You are just a normal disciple under a protector, yet with your skills, you have surpassed disciples of the vice sect leaders, division heads, and elders. How could they possibly let you live peacefully? Hanli's response was like a needle drawing blood. With a single prick, he went straight to the heart of the matter. Senior Disciple Li's expression was gloomy and overcast as he agreed in silence. Your troubles are your own, I have no wish to interfere and cannot interfere even if I wanted to, but, regarding the excruciating backlash from consuming the essence extraction pill, I could help you lessen the pain. Truly. Li Fiyu suddenly snapped to attention as his previous gloomy expression was replaced with anticipation and excitement. He was giddy since the backlash of the essence extraction pill was extremely torturous. Why would I lie to you when there is nothing beneficial for me to gain by doing so? Hanli glanced at Senior Disciple Li. He had already concocted a remedy that would greatly lessen the pain felt by others, a medicine that he researched in his spare time for Zhangtai. It was extremely effective, greatly cutting off the nerve's ability to feel pain. This is truly excellent. Excellent. Li Fiyu clasped his hands as he looked at Hanli with wonder and excitement. Why are you looking at me with such an expression? I don't have the medicine on me right now. I need to return to God Hand Valley before I can concoct it for you. After Li Fiyu heard what Hanli said, he had a slightly embarrassed look on his face. He had just threatened to kill Hanli and now, he was requesting his help. Tomorrow at noon, wait for me at the entrance of the God Hand Valley. I'll deliver the medicine to you there. Since Dr. Mo is currently away, I can't allow anyone to simply enter God Hand Valley, Hanli explained. Very well, I shall be there on time. Thank you, my dear brother. Scared that Hanli would change his mind, Li Fiyu quickly responded with his confirmation. My name is Hanli, I am Dr. Mo's personal disciple. Your cultivation in martial arts is very high, so you can just directly call me Junior Brother Han in the future. After Hanli heard the words my dear brother, he couldn't help but shiver and thus, quickly told Senior Disciple Li his name to prevent him from calling Hanli any more embarrassing titles. Senior Disciple Li's eyelids lightly shuddered as he pondered intensely, trying to decide which was the better path for him. After a short moment, his tightly closed eyes snapped open as he stared intently at the pill in Hanli's hand with a feverish gaze. Hanli did not say anything more and inserted the pill into Senior Disciple Li's mouth. The white foam around his mouth did nothing to stop him from swallowing the pill, and after it was fully ingested, Han Li slowly retracted all of the silver needles from Senior Disciple Li's body. After the retrieval of all the silver needles, the essence extraction pill began to take effect. Senior Disciple Li's pale face started to take on a reddish hue. At this moment, his body started to convulse again and his limbs started to shiver as a low drone issued from his throat. Senior Disciple Li did not want to be a laughing stock in front of Han Li, so he tried unsuccessfully to suppress his pain-filled voice. The low drone involuntarily got louder and louder as the shivers got more intense. It was only after a long period of time that the droning began to slowly subside. Finally, Senior Disciple Li recovered as his face returned to its normal, pale color, and his body stopped convulsing. This signaled that he successfully endured the last of the backlashes from consuming the essence extraction pill. Senior Disciple Li straightened his body, crossed his legs, and closed his eyes in order to enter meditation, attempting to circulate his qi to heal his injuries. Han Li found a large and clean rock nearby and sat down on it, watching Senior Disciple Li. After the time it took to eat a meal, the Senior Disciple Li, who was in a state of meditation, abruptly wrenched open his eyes and drew his saber in a flash, placing the shining blade on Han Li's neck. "Give me a reason not to kill you." Senior Disciple Li's eyes were full of coldness and filled with killing intent. "I just saved your life. Is that not a good enough reason?" Han Li stated calmly with no change to his expression except for the twitching of his brows. If one did not study Han Li's face intently, they would not have seen it. Senior Disciple Li's face slightly softened, but his eyes were still filled with killing intent as he stared at Han Li. "Before I made the decision to save you, I already guessed that you might kill me to protect your secret, but I didn't think that you would act so swiftly." Han Li bitterly laughed as his face was filled with self-mockery. "K. Despite knowing that saving you would bring calamity upon myself, I, a student of medical arts, couldn't simply sit by and watch you die." Han Li sighed. As Senior Disciple Li heard his words, his face took on a somewhat embarrassed expression, and he shifted the saber from Han Li's neck a little but did not fully remove the blade. Han Li secretly let out a breath of relief, and he continued his speech more determinedly. "You have no need to worry that I would divulge your secret. One look at my face and you would know that I'm not one to gossip. If you are still worried, I could swear a binding oath. You should be able to tell that I'm not skilled in martial arts, so if you discover that I broke my vow, you could easily kill me," Han Li calmly suggested. "Okay, swear a binding oath then," Senior Disciple Li said straightforwardly. It was only now that Han Li relaxed. Before he saved Senior Disciple Li, he could infer that Senior Disciple Li was not a cruel or viscous person, but he was not completely sure of his assessment. If he was wrong and Senior Disciple Li was a person that returned kindness with viciousness, he would only be able to defend himself with his secret life-saving method. Knowing that he would not have to use it, Han Li stealthily retracted his hand from within his robes. After Han Li swore a binding oath, Senior Disciple Li finally retracted the saber and returned it to its sheath. Han Li slightly felt a slight trace of blood on his throat, caused by the keen edge of the saber. It was sticky to the touch, and as Han Li's heartbeat returned to normal, he could feel cold sweat trickling down his back. What a close call. My evaluation prior to saving Senior Disciple Li was not comprehensive enough. I'll have to learn from this mistake to prevent my life from being in the control of someone else's hands ever again. He still had some fear lingering from this event. If there's no guarantee of my safety, I will definitely not save others in the future. Han Li decided immediately. This was the first time Han Li had saved someone, but the experience left him with a bad taste in his mouth. This event only helped to reinforce that the world was full of unexpected turnouts, and the last vestige of kindness in him was slowly being discarded away. Even though he had not turned evil, he was far from being a saint. You have saved my life and agreed to keep the matter a secret. I, Li Feiyu, owe you a big favor henceforth. As long as I'm still alive, no matter what you need help with, you can look for me. As long as I am able to accomplish the task, I will definitely help you. As he reclaimed the items that Han Li ransacked through, Senior Disciple Li stated his vow straightforwardly, using his own name as a guarantee after he fully recovered from the pill's backlash. I fear that I currently have nothing to trouble you with, but you should already have plenty of troubles, no. Han Li had a slight smile on his face as he faced Senior Disciple Li with another question. How did you know? Li Feiyu was startled and slightly lost his composure. Anyone would have easily guessed. You are just a normal disciple under a protector, yet with your skills, you have surpassed disciples of the vice sect leaders, division heads, and elders. How could they possibly let you live peacefully? Han Li's response was like a needle drawing blood. With a single prick, he went straight to the heart of the matter. Senior Disciple Li's expression was gloomy and overcast as he agreed in silence. Your troubles are your own, I have no wish to interfere and cannot interfere even if I wanted to, but, regarding the excruciating backlash from consuming the essence extraction pill, I could help you lessen the pain. Truly. Li Feiyu suddenly snapped to attention as his previous gloomy expression was replaced with anticipation and excitement. He was giddy since the backlash of the essence extraction pill was extremely torturous. Why would I lie to you when there is nothing beneficial for me to gain by doing so? Han Li glanced at Senior Disciple Li. He had already concocted a remedy that would greatly lessen the pain felt by others, a medicine that he researched in his spare time for Zhangtai. It was extremely effective, greatly cutting off the nerve's ability to feel pain. This is truly excellent. Excellent. Li Feiyu clasped his hands as he looked at Han Li with wonder and excitement. Why are you looking at me with such an expression? I don't have the medicine on me right now. I need to return to God Hand Valley before I can concoct it for you. After Li Feiyu heard what Han Li said, he had a slightly embarrassed look on his face. He had just threatened to kill Han Li and now, he was requesting his help. Tomorrow at noon, wait for me at the entrance of the God Hand Valley. I'll deliver the medicine to you there. Since Dr. Mo is currently away, I can't allow anyone to simply enter God Hand Valley, Han Li explained. Very well, I shall be there on time. Thank you, my dear brother. Scared that Han Li would change his mind, Li Feiyu quickly responded with his confirmation. My name is Han Li, I am Dr. Mo's personal disciple. Your cultivation in martial arts is very high, so you can just directly call me Junior Brother Han in the future. After Han Li heard the words my dear brother, he couldn't help but shiver and thus, quickly told Senior Disciple Li his name to prevent him from calling Han Li any more embarrassing titles. Maybe Lady Luck was smiling on him, but a sudden thought flashed past his mind. He quickly rushed towards the leather pouch which he had discarded and with deft movement, took out the good luck charm that was hidden inside neatly and quickly. The moment his palm brushed against the good luck charm, a refreshing feeling was emitted from it, calming his mind. His previous frustrations and melancholy all disappeared without a trace, and his qi and blood stopped surging, returning back to their normal state. Currently, Han Li had no interest in discovering the root of the problem that occurred earlier. Holding the good luck charm in his palm, he brought it and pressed it against his face. Gently caressing it, Han Li focused all of his attention on it. After a long while, Han Li heaved a sigh of relief, diverting his attention away from the good luck charm. Hanli didn't know that the phenomenon that happened to him just now was not because of Qigong deviation but rather because he suffered from an inner demon that all cultivators would eventually face. Luckily, he discovered it in its early stages and fought it off by focusing on an object that was familiar to him. If he hadn't, the inner demon would have entered his soul and controlled his body from within, causing him to bleed to death from his meridians. Of course, Hanli wouldn't learn about this until after he truly stepped onto the path of cultivation in the future. Hanli circulated his qi throughout his whole body and found there was nothing abnormal about his condition. What made him gasp in astonishment was that instead of suffering injuries, his cultivation level had unknowingly increased by a great extent. He didn't make a breakthrough to the 4th layer yet, but because of his struggle against the inner demon, he had reached the peak of the 3rd layer earlier than expected and was only a hair length away from breaking through to the 4th. Because of this unexpected stroke of luck, Hanli had a smile on his face. However, he forcefully suppressed the excitement in his heart. He was afraid that his unstable emotions would lead to another attack, and he was uncertain whether he would be able to survive if it happened again. With that in mind, he took the leather pouch, preparing to place good luck charm that had saved his life back inside it. Yi. Hanli realized then that there was an object long forgotten by him inside the leather pouch. An object that had been left lying about in there for a few years, the mysterious bottle. Hanli had completely forgotten about the mysterious bottle. The moment he saw it, he remembered what happened back then. The current Hanli was an archive of knowledge and wisdom that far surpassed the Hanli from 4 years ago. In these 4 years, he had read all the books in Dr. Mo's residence and gained a great amount of knowledge. He also cultivated the nameless oracular chant, which effectively sharpened his mind. From the phenomena that the bottle had displayed in the past, he could easily deduce that it was an extraordinary item with incredible abilities. What Hanli needed to do now was to delve into and unravel the bottle's secrets, and see if it could be of use to him. There was no way he would continue to just leave it lying around in the leather pouch and waste such a mysterious object. Hanli took out the bottle and inspected its entire surface as if he were trying to look for something that he had missed out on during his inspection 4 years ago. But no matter how much he inspected it, there were no new discoveries. Hanli stopped wasting time and opened the cap of the bottle. Floating inside of the mysterious bottle was the jade green droplet of liquid that had manifested 4 years ago, appearing no different than from when it first appeared. However, Hanli was certain that the secrets of the bottle lay in the jade green droplet of liquid. To test his theory, he would need to find some small animals to perform a few cruel, live experiments. It was midnight though, and the sky was pitch black outside. The darkness made it simply impractical for him to hunt for live animals right now, and after experiencing the attack of the inner demon earlier, Hanli was already somewhat exhausted. Even if he could catch a live animal, how would he be able to see if there were any changes to the test subject if it was pitch dark? Any actions Hanli could make would be a waste of effort. After contemplating, Hanli decided to rest and replenish his energy before experimenting the next day. He told himself that there would be a big surprise waiting for him tomorrow, and with that thought, he drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Hanli did some washing up before going to the kitchen outside the valley for a normal breakfast. Back when Dr. Mo was on the mountain, he had instructed the people in the cafeteria to bring the meals to valley, and by virtue of being Dr. Mo's disciple, Hanli's meals were also brought to him, so he didn't have to go out of the valley to eat. However, now that Dr. Mo wasn't in the Seven Mysteries sect, his meals naturally weren't being delivered to him anymore, leaving him to lament his own lack of power and influence. After eating breakfast, he didn't immediately leave. Instead, he went to speak to the head of the kitchen, procuring 2 lively grey hairs for a few taels of silver from him before returning back to the valley. After he returned to the valley, Hanli chose a more spacious location inside the herb garden and tied the rabbits to a stake, making them stay outside in the blazing sun for a long period of time. After the rabbits were dizzy from the heat and were almost dying of thirst, Hanli took out the mysterious bottle and poured the mysterious jade-green droplet of liquid into a bowl before diluting it with water. The mysterious droplet of liquid was about the size of a bean and easily dissolved in the water, causing the whole bowl of water to turn into a jade-green color. Hanli placed the bowl near the rabbits and waited for them to drink from it. Being out in the blazing sun for so long, the rabbits scampered up and drank the water in the bowl in big gulps. Hanli was unwilling to allow the rabbits to drink the entire bowl of diluted water though, and after half of the water was gone, he removed the bowl from the rabbits' reach. After that, he stood to the side and observed them, patiently waiting for any reactions from the rabbits. After a short time passed, about the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn, the rabbits started to frantically jump about, their actions becoming more and more agitated and ferocious. Their bodies then began to undergo an astounding mutation. Their fur and skin started to protrude lumps the size of chicken eggs, and the lumps multiplied until they covered the rabbits' bodies. The lumps caused the rabbits to grow bigger by a single size, swelling up until both of the rabbits grew to the size of watermelons. Looking at the rabbits' mutation, along with their tortured shrieks, Hanli felt truly shocked. What just happened before his eyes was completely outside of his expectations. If the mysterious liquid was a potent poison or a miraculous medicine to increase cultivation, he wouldn't have been so shocked. However, he didn't expect that the rabbits would actually grow lumps all over their bodies and expand to such a size, becoming grotesque beyond belief. Looking at the rabbits in front of him, he saw that they were still growing bigger and bigger. Hanli had at last realized that something was wrong, and suddenly remembered something. He looked at the porcelain bowl in his hand like a snake and threw it to the side by the medicine field. He then turned around and took to his heels, running straight away from the rabbits for more than 10 meters before stopping. Just as he thought of looking back, one after another, 2 sounds simultaneously exploded over. Hanli shuddered and turned his head for a look. As expected, each of the 2 rabbits had turned into a bloody carcass, exploding into several chunks. Flesh and blood were scattered on the ground, covering a patch of grass with a blanket of blood. 2 pits appeared in the places where the rabbits had been originally tethered to. Surrounding the pits were the rabbits' messy remains. Bloody chunks of meat sprinkled the ground, creating a spectacle too terrible to observe. Hanli let out a breath and sat down on the ground. He feared that if he had not reacted quickly enough at that instance, he would have been caught in the explosion. Although he might not have been seriously injured, having his entire body drenched in rabbit blood and dregs of meat would not have been a pleasant affair. Waiting until after his heart calmed down, Hanli stood up and walked over to the pits. After seeing the mutilation at the site, he took a look at the shattered porcelain bowl by the medicine field, feeling speechless. Hanli originally believed that he would have discovered the green liquid to be some sort of panacea, but he didn't expect it to be such a frightening thing. Poison was poison, but it made the rabbits die so tragically. No matter what he said to himself, he could not pass this off as a trick. It was far too frightening. Hanli was not unfamiliar with deadly poisons. Under Dr. Mo's several years of instruction, Hanli was experienced with many poisons capable of delivering an instant death, but none of them were capable of killing a man so terribly. After a while, Hanli regained his composure. Keeping his head calm, he made plans to depart from the medicine field. Because it was soon going to be noon, he had to deliver the secret medicine to Senior Disciple Li. As for everything here, he would deal with it once he finished delivering the medicine. With these thoughts in mind, Han Li didn't bother taking another look at the scene of the explosion, leaving all these troubles behind for later, and returned to his residence. After resting for a moment, he went and brought the medicine to the entrance of God Hand Valley. Han Li was very punctual. He arrived at the entrance just as noon arrived, but Li Feiyu seemed to have already been there for a while now, anxiously waiting for him. He was waiting alone at the valley's entrance, wearing a white embroidered robe. However, he still carried along the saber that had previously left a deep impression on Han Li. Since Han Li hadn't arrived yet, Li Feiyu's face showed a sliver of worry, anxiously looking towards the direction of the valley. As soon as he saw Han Li finally arrive, he put away his anxious expression. The corner of his mouth slightly rose, showing a smile on his face. Junior Disciple Han, you are truly quite punctual. You said noon, and you arrived right on time. I was waiting here for almost an hour, Li Feiyu said half jokingly, half complaining. My apologies. Blending the medicine took too much time yesterday, so I didn't sleep until it was very late. I woke up a little late this morning. By the time I finished taking care of some errands, it was almost noon already. Han Li said. Only half of what he said was true. Junior Disciple Han, medicine, the medicine, did you finish making it? Senior Disciple Li was quite anxious and flustered, actually speaking with somewhat of a stutter. Han Li didn't directly answer Senior Disciple Li's question. Instead, he calmly smiled, slowly taking out a large medicine bag out from his robes and throwing it over to Li Feiyu. Every time before you consume the essence extraction pill, take the medicine by mixing a spoon of the medicinal powder in cooled boiled water, and it will help alleviate your pain. Thank you, Junior Disciple Han. Thank you. Senior Disciple Li was wild with joy. Even if it could only ease his pain, he still regarded it as great news. The pain from taking the essence extraction pill made it so that he would shiver even when he just thought about it. He had already tried many painkillers before, but they all had no effect. However, since Junior Disciple Han knew all of the characteristics of the essence extraction pill and had taken it before, perhaps this medicine would actually be effective. Don't thank me just yet, let's wait and see if the medicine works first. Also, this is only a year's worth of medicine. I've currently used up all of the medicinal ingredients I had and I won't be able to make any more for you until I gather enough again, Han Li spoke bluntly. No problem. Isn't this a year's worth of medicine? This is enough for now. Regardless of whether or not this medicine is effective, I, Li Feiyu, appreciate Junior Disciple Han's kind intentions. Having gotten what he wanted, Senior Disciple Li's expression returned to normal and was no longer so anxious, and he once again expressed his gratitude to Han Li. Han Li faintly smiled. Not saying anything else, he took the initiative to part ways with Senior Disciple Li. With the secret medicine in his hands, Li Feiyu naturally wanted to test its efficacy as soon as possible. He didn't keep Han Li waiting, and the two mutually took their leave. After returning from the valley entrance, the first thing Han Li did was clean up the medicine fields. He swept the rabbit remains, bloodied earth, and broken bowl shards all into a hole and buried them, and just like that, it appeared as if nothing had happened. Satisfied, Han Li patted his hands and looked around to see if he had missed anything. When his eyes fell onto where the porcelain bowl had shattered, he couldn't help but start thinking. He remembered very clearly that when he threw away the bowl, the diluted water within had spilled all over a small portion of the medicine field, landing on several medicinal herbs. He couldn't help but be somewhat hesitant since he didn't know whether these medicinal herbs would become poisonous after absorbing the water. Also, if someone were to eat these poisonous herbs, would they also experience the same horrible death as the rabbits? Should he just destroy these poisonous plants? This chain of questions abruptly rose in Han Li's mind. Han Li pondered for a while, and eventually decided to wait and do another small experiment. If in the following days, the medicinal herbs really became poisonous, it still wouldn't be too late for him to destroy them. With that decided, he looked around to see if there was anything else he could do and then went back to the stone room to practice. He hoped that he would be capable of making a breakthrough, on account of his earlier advancement. Han Li currently no longer cared about the chant's specific usefulness. His cultivation of this chant had already become instinctive. If he didn't cultivate it, Han Li wouldn't know what else he would do in the mountain valley. Stubbornly cultivating this chant to a greater layer of cultivation had already become his current life goal. After an afternoon absorbed in cultivation, Han Li dispiritedly discovered that he truly wasn't a genius. Although he felt that the distance from the fourth layer could be pierced through by a finger, he couldn't advance an inch forward and had diligently cultivated the whole afternoon in vain. It seemed he couldn't cultivate any further without the support of medicinal elixirs. Otherwise, it would be very likely that he would forever stay at the peak of the third layer, unable to advance any further. Han Li's mind began to hope expectantly that Dr. Mo would return a bit earlier, and that he would have been lucky enough to have found enough medicinal ingredients to help Han Li break through his current predicament. Another night passed. Han Li woke up at the crack of dawn and walked towards the medicine field. He wanted to observe whether or not the medicinal herbs had changed in any way. Before he even entered the medicinal field, he could suddenly smell several rich medicinal fragrances. Han Li was slightly dazed, but soon after, his mind stirred. Perhaps it's... He couldn't help but increase his pace until he finally arrived in front of several medicinal herbs that were emitting an intense fragrance. Were these the medicinal herbs from yesterday? Han Li didn't dare to trust his eyes. Using his hands, he fiercely slapped his slightly drowsy face until the pain made him stop. The leaves of this yellow dragon grass has some hints of purple, the bitter lotus flower actually has flowered 9 petals, and the skin of this forgotten sorrow fruit has turned black, ha ha. Ha ha. Han Li couldn't hold back his laughter anymore. Usually, Han Li was calm and composed, but this time, he couldn't help but laugh heartily while facing the sky. This time I came across a great fortune. These medicinal herbs only needed 1 night to develop properties that require 2 years of age. All of their appearances turned to that of herbs aged more than 10 years. Seeing the color of the leaves, the shape of the fruit, and the petals' fragrance, there are all qualities that belong to rare herbs that have already matured for quite some time. Han Li carefully examined all of the medicinal herbs, confirming they were identical to those described in medicine books. They were truly rare medicinal ingredients that have been aged for a great length of time. If I can mature medicinal herbs with this method, how many rare medicinal ingredients will I have? I can also sell the medicinal herbs that I don't use. If that happens, how much silver will I make? Han Li was unable to restrain his excitement and started to let his imagination run wild. Han Li's thoughts further developed and he became more elated. He felt that he had truly picked up a treasure this time. All of a sudden, he somersaulted a few times. At this moment, he no longer maintained his normal calm appearance and expressed the excitement entirely like that of a normal 14-15-year-old adolescent. After a while, Han Li had finally calmed down, and his brain recovered its sharp wit. He began to think of how to deal with the somewhat difficult problems that were brought by this huge meat pie that fell from the sky. First of all, there seemed to be no problems with the external appearance of these medicinal herbs. However, he still had not tested their medicinal properties. After all, they only became like this after they absorbed that strange liquid. Who knew whether their internal elements were abnormal? Yesterday, he had seen those rabbits' miserable demise with his own eyes. He still had to be careful. Secondly, the green liquid within the small mysterious bottle had already been used up. He did not know whether the strange phenomenon that created the liquid drop would happen again. Perhaps it was an occurrence that only happened once. At night, he would go to confirm it himself. If there were no problems with these two matters, then he truly needed to grasp the details and particulars of the drug-inducing ingredients in this manner. Then he would have complete control over this inconceivable method. Hanli later pondered, arriving at the conclusion that if he were unable to resolve his few difficult problems that were earlier mentioned, this huge meat pie would only be a passing flower lost in a fog. After everything was taken into account, Hanli began experimenting. He first went to the large kitchen outside of the valley and asked the manager for another pair of gray-haired rabbits. Hanli's actions made the kitchen manager both happy and somewhat puzzled. Why does this youngster keep on buying live rabbits? Could it be he wants to butcher them himself and practice his culinary skills? Hanli didn't care about what others thought of him. He didn't keep the rabbits at the medicine fields like before. Instead, he bound them to the gate of his room so that he could conveniently observe how they change at any time. After that, he went to the medicine fields and carefully picked the matured medicinal herbs. He made quite a few rolls of bone and muscle enhancing medicines and mixed them into the rabbits' favorite foods. Every day, he fed them 3 such meals to test whether these medicinal herbs were poisonous. With this finished, Hanli anxiously waited for nightfall. He felt time pass very slowly. Later, the moment he had been expectantly waiting for had finally arrived. Just as the sky began to grow dark, Hanli ran out and took the small bottle from the back of his room and set it on the ground. He concentrated on the small bottle, anticipating its change. As a quarter of an hour went by, the bottle showed no activity. Then half an hour went by, but the bottle still didn't show any activity. And 3/4 of an hour. As time elapsed, Hanli's heart had sunk more and more. He had stayed awake until daybreak. The bottle, however, was still no different from before. He was completely dispirited. Could it be that this bottle was truly usable only once? Or did he not do something correctly? Hanli strengthened his spirit and looked at his surroundings. There are no suspicious areas apart from the somewhat black sky. Hanli said to himself. He suddenly stopped, at a loss for words. He lifted his head and gazed at the sky. The sky was black and cloudy, not a thing could be seen. The sky is a bit dark. At these words, Hanli suddenly understood. Could it be that it's because the clouds are preventing any light from the moon or the stars from falling on the bottle? Hanli recalled that the bottle's previous transformation occurred during a clear sky. There had been nothing in the sky sheltering the moons and the stars, but today, there was gloomy weather. The whole sky was covered with black clouds. Hanli's hopes were raised, but he saw the color of the sky turn a bit pale. He knew that a clear sky would not happen tonight. He put away the bottle and prepared to test it again once the sky was clear. However, contrary to Hanli's expectations, the next half-month had uninterrupted drizzling and persisted until now. Hanli looked at the continuous waves of drizzle outside. His mind was gloomy, and he continued to grow more anxious as he waited for the weather to clear. It had continued to drizzle down constantly without end or even the slightest intention of stopping. He turned around towards the interior of his room and looked at the two rabbits, which had escaped the rain. They had a healthy and lively appearance, making Hanli even more depressed. Ever since the rabbits ate their medicine-infused food, not only were there no problems, they were even more vigorous than before. In these past 10 days, Hanli had carefully watched them every day to confirm the rabbits had no symptoms of poisoning. Instead, because they ate the bone and muscle strengthening medicines, they became even more healthy. Not only did this good result fail to make Hanli happy, it also made his mind somewhat worried about his losses and gains. He hadn't the slightest means to make himself calm. Whether or not the bottle could produce more green liquid had already become the key to all of his problems. In addition, the lingering, lousy weather made it so that he was unable to test his theory. How could this not make Hanli utterly depressed? Just as Hanli became convinced that the rain would be endless, the sun finally rose into the sky and cleared away the clouds. Hanli had already discovered the secret of the bottle half a month ago, and thus he was naturally impatient. On that clear night sky, Hanli saw once more the miracle from 4 years ago. Little by little, small orbs of light encircled the bottle before merging into one big sphere. Upon seeing this miracle once more, Hanli raised his head excitedly. It seemed the bottle was usable more than just one time. It could repeatedly regenerate the droplet of mysterious liquid as long as there was moonlight. After another 7 days of waiting, the mysterious droplet of liquid finally formed. When Hanli saw the contents of the bottle, he was tremendously happy and excited. Now that he knew that he had a steady stream of precious herbs, he would no longer have to worry about insufficient resources. The value of a medicinal herb was determined by its age. The older the medicinal herb was, the more precious it would be as its medicinal effects would grow more potent. At the same time, an ingredient that was more precious would naturally be harder to find. Some ingredients could only be found in the depths of the forest or hanging from sheer cliffs. For those who didn't risk their lives, there was no way that they would be able to find these precious ingredients. Although there were several pharmacies that specialized in cultivating these rare herbs, these herbs were generally harvested so quickly in order to satisfy the large demand that they never got a chance to grow very old. For that reason, most weren't stupid enough to try and cultivate herbs for a long period of time and instead chose to harvest them as soon as possible. Only the wealthy families could afford to grow and cultivate rare herbs for stockpiling in the case of a crisis. Since the herbs were not only rare strains but were also planted for a long time, their effectiveness was many times greater than that of common herbs. There wasn't a need for a specialist to cultivate the plants either. Not only did these families pass on their money from generation to generation, the herbs they had spent so much time on would be passed down as well. As a result, time was not an issue for these families. For centuries, these herbs would be cultivated in this way. In the case of both money and rare herbs, common people had no access to such a stockpile. Occasionally, rare ingredients would appear briefly on the market, only to be purchased by the richer families. This slowly increased the prices of herbs and ingredients to the point that some of the herbs had been labeled as priceless. Hanli hadn't been too optimistic about Dr. Mo's ability to procure the precious herbs needed for his cultivation. But now, there was no need for him to worry. With this mysterious bottle, he would be able to create many ingredients in a short amount of time. With a strange feeling in his heart, Hanli had been experimenting with the mysterious droplet of liquid on herbal ingredients for the past 10 days. One time, he diluted the green liquid and sprayed it on some herbs. The result after 2 days was that the plant effectively grew 2 years' worth. This was much better than the original product, and with this experiment, Hanli had learned an important rule. On the next experiment, Hanli did not bother to dilute the jade green droplet, letting a drop of the green liquid fall onto a stalk of ginseng. On the second day, Hanli had unexpectedly seen that the ginseng became virtually indistinguishable from wild 100-year-old ginseng. This experiment made Hanli happier than ever, not because he now owned a rare ingredient, but because he had confirmed the usage of the mysterious droplet of liquid. Afterward, Hanli decided to set aside some of the green liquid for experimentation, while the rest would be placed in other containers like porcelain, jade bottles, and even silver bottles. However, he soon discovered that none of the bottles were able to contain the liquid for longer than a minute. After the liquid was taken out from the bottle, it needed to be used within a minute. Otherwise, it would slowly disappear without a trace. Even the diluted form of the liquid had the same result, albeit it could last for a longer amount of time. Even if other liquids were mixed together, they would disappear without a trace soon afterward. After many attempts, Hanli gave up on storing the liquid in any other container. It appeared that he wouldn't be able to stockpile this mysterious liquid. Thus, Hanli could only proceed to test the herbal aging properties of the green liquid. Hanli brought out a bundle of 3-crow grass and used the liquid on it. Almost immediately, it had turned into 100-year-old yellow-colored 3-crow grass. Just from a single drop of the liquid, its age would increase by 100 years. After seeing such an effect, Hanli made extensive use of the liquid for the next 2 months. Every time he was able to acquire more liquid within this bottle, he would drip it onto the strand of 3-crow grass. It gradually turned from a yellow color to a yellowy black color. In the end, it turned jet black, which was the result of it successfully aging to become 1,000-year-old 3-crow grass. After the success of this particular experiment, it would appear that with patience, the 3-crow grass would be able to be constantly aged and thus improved. However, there wasn't much point to this. He was already satisfied to know that he was able to deliberately harness the liquid's effect. Besides, he didn't need such ancient ingredients, just about 100 years old would be enough for him. After this long series of experimentation, Hanli finally decided to take a break. It came to his attention that Dr. Mo had been away from the mountain for quite a long time now. Right now, Hanli was holding the 1,000-year-old 3-crow grass in his hand while he sat back on his bed with a lackadaisical expression. His eyes were looking at the 3-crow grass as if he was studying it. But in reality, if one were to look at the disorderly eyes of Hanli, they would know that he wasn't paying attention to the 3-crow grass at all. Instead, he was staring off into the sky, thinking of everything else. He no longer had the feeling of joy from when he first created this 1,000-year-old 3-crow grass. Instead, he was now thinking about the dangers this little bottle could bring to him, and what precautions he should take. Hanli had seen time and time again in the books of Dr. Mo's library about people who suffered terrible fates as a result of acquiring a precious treasure. This bottle in his hand was definitely a precious treasure. If someone else were to discover the existence of this bottle, then he doubted that he would live to see the next day. For example, if a hall leader was to find out, then there was no way they would let this go. They would stop at nothing to seize the treasure and kill the owner, before letting anyone else find out. I cannot tell anyone of this bottle, and I must be careful of how I use it. The way this bottle collected light was far too noticeable and could easily be discovered by anyone watching, Hanli thought to himself. He had to keep his mouth shut about this in order to ensure no one would be able to find out his secret. However, I am in a position where I need to use herbs to cultivate. If I don't use this bottle, it would be a terrible waste. I must find a way to get the best of both worlds. He thought about his cultivation needs for a moment with some sadness. It went without saying that his cultivation was the top priority. Even Dr. Mo was aware that Hanli had barely made any progress in the past few years. While Dr. Mo was away, Hanli knew that the bottle would temporarily be safe within God Hand Valley because he was the only one there. Normally, no outsider would rashly enter the valley. This guaranteed a small time period where it was unlikely for anything unexpected to occur. Hanli had already estimated when Dr. Mo would return. If Dr. Mo could not find any good medicinal ingredients in the nearby regions, he would probably want to go look in more remote locations. It was very likely that he would have to go to one of the ancient forests deep in the mountains where men rarely ventured. Only in those kinds of desolate regions would there be any chances of obtaining a few rare medicinal ingredients. However, Dr. Mo would need at least a year in order to travel into the mountains, gather medicinal ingredients, and return to the valley. Dr. Mo had already been absent for almost half a year. Hanli estimated that he had another 6 to 7 months before Dr. Mo returned to the Seven Mysteries sect. With the time he had left, Hanli would do his utmost to hasten the growth of as many useful medicinal herbs as possible. He knew that he could not blindly squander the green liquid, so he planned to acquire only the medicinal ingredients that he would use in a few precious formulas. Hanli quickly proceeded to make the medicines that would augment his strength and help him break through bottlenecks. They were exactly the medicinal formulas that Dr. Mo had left the valley to concoct. However, Dr. Mo was forced to venture outside of the valley due to a lack of necessary medicinal ingredients. Any one of these ingredients would be virtually impossible for an ordinary household to obtain on the market because of their sheer rarity. The practitioners of Jiang Hu would even fight over these rare treasures with all their might. With Dr. Mo's extremely brilliant medical expertise, he could concoct medicines that only he knew how to concoct, including never-before-seen formulas. Even so, although Dr. Mo knew the method of producing these medicines, he was unable to do anything if he lacked the ingredients. Dr. Mo could only sigh. When Hanli had previously studied the art of healing under Dr. Mo's tutelage, he had been greatly interested in these rare recipes. Although he never previously expected that he would be able to concoct these precious elixirs, he remembered many of these recipes. Dr. Mo had met Hanli's enthusiasm to learn these formulas with an indifferent attitude. Whenever Hanli asked, Dr. Mo would teach Hanli with great detail. Nothing was concealed from his disciple. Dr. Mo probably believed that his formulas and knowledge would be lost forever if he didn't pass them down. Concocting these formulas had now become Hanli's pastime. He eagerly went to the fields every day to accelerate the growth of the medicinal herbs in accordance with the formula's requirements. When doing so, he didn't dare to relax in the slightest since he knew that his time was limited. He had to hurry and finish mixing these medicines before Dr. Mo returned. Once the doctor arrived, Hanli would conceal and put the bottle away, no longer able to easily use the bottle once more. Hanli did not have even the slightest degree of confidence that he would be able to use the small bottle in Dr. Mo's presence without revealing its power. He knew in his heart that Dr. Mo was an extremely shrewd and careful person. So Hanli did not intend to tell Dr. Mo about the bottle's secret. Hanli thought the relation he had with Dr. Mo was quite peculiar. It was definitely not as simple as an ordinary master-disciple relationship. Dr. Mo often looked at him with a strange look in his eyes. This always made Hanli think that Dr. Mo was concealing a deadly secret from him. Especially in the past 2 years, Hanli felt that this feeling had grown even stronger. This made Dr. Mo and Hanli incapable of having the intimate relationship between a common master and disciple. If there were nothing to say, there would be silence. Dr. Mo had actually treated him exceptionally well in his daily life, never physically or verbally abusing Hanli. In addition, Dr. Mo spared no pain or effort to help create the best conditions for Hanli to cultivate the chant. However, there seemed to be a barrier of separation that existed between the master and disciple, an awkward atmosphere that drifted between them. Dr. Mo clearly realized that this gap existed. However, he did not feel the slightest need to remedy the mutual indifference between master and disciple, leaving it to be. The only time when he directly involved himself in Hanli's life was whenever he urged Hanli to increase the pace of his cultivation. Every time Dr. Mo visited Hanli, the grotesque aspect of his gaze gradually lessened, so much so that after a long period of time, it was no longer displayed. However, Hanli's keen sixth sense faintly informed him that Dr. Mo hadn't truly abandoned his plans, but rather ingeniously concealed his intentions. Thus, Hanli's vigilance against Dr. Mo had deepened further. Under these circumstances, how could he possibly dare let Dr. Mo know of the bottle's secret? Hanli had learned an unshakable lesson from reading numerous history books: refrain from hurting others but guard against those trying to hurt you. Regardless of whether Dr. Mo truly wanted to harm him, heightening his vigilance wouldn't be a bad decision, even if his feelings were mistaken. If Dr. Mo had truly intended to harm him, Hanli's heightened vigilance could possibly save him from suffering a severe injury. If his sixth sense was mistaken, then a heightened vigilance wouldn't harm him. Either way, Hanli wouldn't take the initiative to harm his master. Hanli was still Dr. Mo's apprentice and would do his utmost to be a filial apprentice. Hanli wasn't too comfortable with his feelings regarding Dr. Mo. After all, this kind of strange master-disciple relationship was completely unheard of in the Seven Mysteries sect. Thinking of this, Hanli could not help but sigh. The mysterious green bottle absolutely couldn't be used once Dr. Mo returned. However, Hanli knew that even if he managed to somehow hide it from Dr. Mo, another person from the Seven Mysteries sect might uncover the secret by accident. His best choice was to hide the bottle away forever and act as if it had never existed. Unwilling to forever separate himself from the bottle, Hanli made up his mind to use the bottle cautiously and secretly once Dr. Mo returned. Once he came upon this decision, Hanli relaxed his mind and fell asleep on his bed. In the following months, Hanli secretly used the bottle's green liquid to accelerate the growth of large quantities of precious medicinal ingredients. He then used these medicinal ingredients in accordance with the formula, concocting many rare medicines. But in the process of concocting the elixirs, many failures had occurred. Each failure had left Hanli a lasting soreness since the ingredients used to make the medicines were rare and of the highest quality. Each failure represented a waste of an innumerable amount of silver. However, he could not be blamed. These were the first time he compounded these formulas, so failing several times was inevitable. Even if Dr. Mo had personally compounded these medicines, he would have made one or two mistakes. Only in this way could Hanli console himself. Yellow Dragon Pellet, Pure Spirit Powder, Gold Essence Pill, and Vitality Raising Pellet. These rare medicines, rarely seen on the market, were placed in tens of small bottles. One by one, they were neatly arranged in front of Hanli. As Hanli looked at these small bottles, his face lit up with delight. With these miraculous medicines, he could reach the fifth and sixth layer without expending too much effort, not to mention the fourth layer. Among these medicines, Yellow Dragon Pellet and Gold Essence Pill would assist him in increasing his strength, thereby raising his power, and had the wonderful effect of rebuilding his body and bones. Pure Spirit Powder was a world-famous detoxifying panacea, capable of dissolving thousands of deadly poisons. Lastly, vitality-raising pellet was a legendary medicine that had a surprising effect on internal injuries. Regardless of how many grave internal and external injuries one suffered from, so long as the person eating the pill remained alive, any injury would be immediately healed, allowing one's life to be preserved. Originally, Hanli hadn't planned on concocting medicinal pills for other purposes than aiding him in his cultivation. But after thinking about it, he decided that, no matter what, he was still a martial artist. Who knew if one day he would be struck by a natural disaster or get embroiled in the rampage of one of the various martial factions in Jiang Hu and be killed. It would be for the best to prepare some medicines for wounds and poisons in advance, because if he were to be injured or poisoned without having any medicine nearby, that would be too unfortunate. With this mindset, Hanli had decided to make more of two types of medicines, pure spirit powder and vitality-raising pellet, to prepare himself for any accidents. One person could only live one life after all, and Hanli didn't want to die an untimely death. Because he was constantly making medicines, his cultivation with the chant had slowed down considerably. But this was unavoidable, since there were many things in the world to be perfected, and there would surely always be something that one had to give up on. After refining medicinal pills for half a day, he began to consume them, starting with the yellow dragon pellet and the gold essence pill. These two medicines truly deserved to be considered panaceas of legends that could shock everyone with their power. After eating them, he had effortlessly broken through the bottleneck and reached the fourth layer of the chant. Once he reached the fourth layer, Hanli immediately felt the difference between his current and past self. His five senses had exploded into a whole new realm as everything had suddenly turned brighter and much more distinct. Previously, he wasn't able to make out minute features out in the distance, but now he was able to see them on an enlarged scale, clearer than ever. With his eyes, he could easily see the small insects that were crawling about the edges of his room. His sense of hearing had completely changed as well. Sounds he had never noticed before could be heard to an astonishing degree, like the rustling sounds of an earthworm crawling through the ground or the buzzing sounds of an insect flying through the air. These sounds were so loud, it was almost as if they were taking place next to his ear. Everything could be heard so clearly, but aside from that, Hanli could even make out some new scents thanks to his improved sense of smell. Hanli was overjoyed because this was the very first time that his efforts in practicing this chant had actually paid off. This made him realize that the oracular chant he was condemning before was not totally useless. Instead, it had a mysterious and unique aspect to it that could only be unlocked through cultivation. Previously, even though his senses did indeed improve each time he had broken through to a new layer, none of those changes were as drastic as when he had reached the fourth layer. It was almost as if he had become a completely different person. Aside from this, he also felt that his body movements were a lot quicker than before. Even his mind and vitality had grown stronger. Even if Hanli didn't sleep for several days, he still felt as wide awake as always. With so many changes occurring, Hanli sat there and took note of each and every single change to his body. These changes opened a new world of sensation to him, and so he was reluctant to do anything other than relish in these feelings. Only now did he realize that all of these changes had appeared only at the fourth layer of the chant. It could be considered that he was at the small success stage of the oracular chant only after reaching the fourth layer. He couldn't help but think that this fourth layer had brought about such an unforgettable sensation. If the fourth layer was like this, then surely breaking through to the fifth or even sixth layer would be even more magnificent. Soon after Hanli finally broke through and understood the subtleties of this cultivation method, his master Dr. Mo had finally returned to the valley. However, he wasn't alone, as he had brought back a mysterious person. The moment Dr. Mo returned to the valley, Hanli heard his all too familiar cough. He had been in his cultivation room striving to advance one more layer, but the moment he had heard Dr. Mo's voice, he left the room to head down to the valley and greet him. It had been a year since he had last met his master, so it was time to meet Dr. Mo once again. The moment Hanli saw Dr. Mo, he was extremely shocked. Dr. Mo was still the same in figure, but there was an ashen complexion on his face with the smallest hint of anger. Although he had originally been yellow with illness, he had never looked so haggard in such an extreme manner as he did now. But what surprised Hanli the most was the mysterious person behind Dr. Mo. The person was wrapped in a black mantle that completely covered every single part of the body so that not a single inch of skin could be seen. The figure was rather large and was taller than Hanli by at least 2 heads. Because of the mantle that covered the entirety of the person's body, Hanli wasn't able to determine the person's facial appearance. At the very least, he could tell that the person's expression was especially fierce and extremely ugly. Hanli suppressed the questions on his mind as he hurriedly greeted Dr. Mo with a respectful tone and waited for Dr. Mo to say something back. He knew that while the Dr. Mo did not care for such traditions, there was an expectation for a disciple to greet their master respectfully. This was something that could not be discarded as a useless tradition since it flattered the master, making the master more likely to treat the disciple well. Hanli had also understood Dr. Mo's thoughts. Since Dr. Mo had always pushed him to practice the chants to cultivate and had not seen Hanli in a very long time, he would undoubtedly ask about how far he had gotten with the chant. As expected, the moment Dr. Mo saw Hanli approach him, he stared blankly for a moment before coughing twice and speaking up. "How far have you gotten with the chant? Have you made a breakthrough?" There was an anxious look of hope on his face. Hanli long since expected that this question would come and had prepared an answer beforehand. "I'm still the same, without experiencing any significant change." Hanli didn't want to tell the truth of his progress because there would be no way for him to explain his sudden massive increase in training speed. It would have been impossible for Hanli to break through from the 3rd layer to the 4th layer with his own talent in such a short amount of time. "Extend your arm." Dr. Mo's expression sank and his voice became stiff. Hanli carefully paid attention to Dr. Mo's expression. His heart shook for a moment before becoming calm once more. He wasn't afraid of having his pulse taken to measure the true qi in his body. This was because, after reaching the 4th layer, Hanli had discovered that he could freely manipulate the inner workings of his body, such as the intensity of his true qi. He could easily control his true qi so that it would resemble that of the 3rd layer. With this underhanded method, he had no fear of Dr. Mo's inspection. Dr. Mo's face showed no emotion. His eyes were half open and half closed while his hand was wrapped firmly around Hanli's wrist. His attention was completely concentrated on the true qi within Hanli's body. He remained silent for quite some time. After the time it takes to make a cup of tea, Dr. Mo let out a deep breath, as if he were releasing all the vexation from his mind, and opened his eyes. A vigorous brilliance shot from his cloudy eyes, rendering any man incapable of facing him. His expression was somber. It was very obvious to Hanli that he was dissatisfied, but Dr. Mo did not release harsh words of criticism. He swung his arms indifferently, showing Hanli that he was about to leave. Hanli perceptibly followed close behind him. Although he was very curious about the mysterious man at his side, Hanli knew it was not the time to inquire as he wished. After he entered the room, Dr. Mo somewhat tiredly sat in the armchair and leaned back into it, half sitting, half reclining. The vigorous brilliance had already scattered, revealing his old sickly self. The mysterious man had followed closely from the beginning. When Dr. Mo sat down, he stood behind Dr. Mo's chair, his back upright and motionless. Han Li knew that Dr. Mo was currently dissatisfied, but he was unwilling to open his mouth and stir Dr. Mo's foul mood up. Mimicking the mysterious man, he walked to the middle of the room and lowered his head toward Dr. Mo, staying tactfully still. He waited for Dr. Mo to start his questioning. For a long time, nobody spoke. Han Li was somewhat baffled and lost his patience. He thought quietly about raising his head and stealing a glance at Dr. Mo. If you want to look, look. Why would you possibly want to be sneaky? Just as he raised his head halfway up, Dr. Mo's cold, strict voice traveled over. Han Li was startled for a second and then, he obediently raised his head. His gaze circled around Dr. Mo's face and immediately withdrew from it. Han Li's face had an unusual expression. His heart sunk as if he were in a perilous situation, constantly rolling around in his chest. How did Dr. Mo's face suddenly become so strange? On his gray, withered face, there was a faint layer of black qi. It was as if the black qi had life, extending an innumerable amount of tiny tentacles and scurrying threateningly across his face. This caused Han Li to be even more fearful. Dr. Mo had replaced his former, everyday rigid expression with an expression of fierce resolution. He was watching Han Li attentively with a truly malicious gaze. The corner of his mouth revealed a slight mocking sneer. Han Li felt the situation wasn't favorable towards him. A somewhat restless mood spiraled in his mind while an ominous atmosphere began to spread freely in the room. He cautiously and vigilantly decided to retreat half a step. He withdrew a cylinder from his sleeve, causing his stressed mental state to relax a bit. At this moment, he suddenly heard Dr. Mo's soft mockery. A petty trick? You even dare to take it out and show it off. Dr. Mo's body moved. He stood from his half-reclined position with a strange momentum. He. With a smile, his body flickered towards Han Li's side as if he were a specter before giving a cold laugh. Han Li's expression greatly changed. He knew this turn of events was far from good and hastily lifted his arm. However, his entire body went numb and he was incapable of moving a single step. It was only until this moment that he saw that Dr. Mo's finger leave the acupointment on his chest. Dr. Mo was truly too fast. To Han Li's surprise, he couldn't even perceive in the slightest when Dr. Mo had taken action. Venerable Senior Mo, what are you going to do? Has this disciple done something wrong? Sir has always talked without hesitating. Is there any need to press this disciple's acupointment? At this moment Han Li was no longer capable of keeping his calm. He said this to Dr. Mo with a forced smile. Dr. Mo did not speak at all. He only hit his back a few times and lightly coughed. His appearance was much like a senile senior, too weak to resist the wind. Han Li had just seen Dr. Mo assume a decisive and violent appearance. How could Han Li possibly dare to regard him to be some common ill old man? Instead, Han Li attached Dr. Mo's artificial frailness with even more importance. Dr. Mo, what about your status? There is no need to lower yourself to this disciple's level. What disadvantage would you have from undoing this disciple's acupointment? This disciple will take responsibility and forget about this matter. Han Li had continued to spout many pleasant, flattering lines. However, Dr. Mo did not pay any attention to him and instead reached into Han Li's sleeve and removed the hidden cylinder. Then, he looked at Han Li with a gaze of mockery and contempt. Seeing this situation, Han Li's heart suddenly sank to its greatest depths. He originally had the intention of using speech to arouse sympathy from Dr. Mo, but his plan had completely failed. It appeared that Dr. Mo wouldn't give the slightest opportunity for Han Li to gain an advantage. Han Li gradually grew quiet. His face became eerily calm, and he looked back at Dr. Mo with a gaze lacking even the slightest amount of emotion. Suddenly, everything in the room had seemed to become entirely still. There was absolute silence, like the calm before a storm. Good. 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 Dr. Mo had suddenly let out 3 good s. You are worthy of being a person that I, Mo Juran, have taken notice of. So you can hold a straight face even at this moment, calm in your hour of peril. It seems the advantage I gained by pressing your appointment was not in vain. Dr. Mo suddenly praised Han Li. Just how do you plan on dealing with me? Han Li didn't answer Dr. Mo's words and asked a question instead. He. How will I deal with you? Dr. Mo repeated Han Li's question, refusing to answer. How will I deal with you? It will depend on your own performance. What do you mean? Han Li wrinkled his brow, vaguely guessing a few of Dr. Mo's intentions. I won't say. Use your intelligence. You should be able to somewhat understand, right? I can only guess a bit, but I don't understand the exact specifics of your plan. Han Li did not deny it, stating it very bluntly. Very good, that is the correct way. You can ask me any questions, don't keep them to yourself. Dr. Mo's face wore a sinister smile. The black chi on his face thickened into many layers, causing his appearance to become even more malevolent. I know you have always been guarded against me and did not truly see me as your master. But regardless, it does not matter. I also do not truly see you as my disciple. Dr. Mo said this with a slight snort. How old do you think I am? His cheek muscles visibly throbbed as he stiffly asked this strange question. Based on your appearance, you look to be older than 60 years old, but since you asked this question, your age must not match your appearance. You are either much older or much younger than you appear to be. Although Han Li was astonished, he continued to speak with a calm voice. Zez. For a brat from the countryside to become a sharp and intelligent person, you sure live up to the name of an eternal spring arts cultivator. Dr. Mo's mouth continued to praise Han Li, but he stared at his disciple with a feverish gleam. You guessed correctly. I am only 37 this year. A number that caused Han Li to feel disbelief came out from Dr. Mo's mouth. That's impossible. Han Li said in surprise, unable to maintain his composure. Impossible. It is indeed impossible. The people who see me, not even mentioning 60, would tell others that I am an elder in my 70s. I'm afraid no one would be able to guess my true age, Dr. Mo said as his voice suddenly became high and sharp in pitch. To Han Li's ears, the ear-piercing sound caused extreme discomfort, as if it touched upon a sore spot within his heart. I, Mo Juran, used to be so famous in my early years that at one point in time, within the land province of the state of Yu, I barehandedly established my own spot within the heavens, making a name for myself. Hi hey. At that time, everybody heard of my prestigious name Ghost Hand within the land province. Regardless of whether they were righteous or evil, those who followed me lived while those who went against me died. Dr. Mo resumed his normal pitch and used a deep and slow tone to narrate his story. Following his own narration, his eyes emitted a sharpness that was comparable to a blade's edge, as if he were back in the past when he was high-spirited and in a position of power. Listening to Dr. Mo's story, Han Li was secretly shocked. He never thought that his master would have had such a renowned name at one point in time. Regrettably, good things don't last forever. Right when I entered my 30s and was preparing to take a big step forward in spreading my name, I fell under the plot of a despicable character and was poisoned by my own trusted aide. Even by relying on my impressive medicinal knowledge, I was only able to prevent the poison from flaring up but was unable to completely recover, causing my power to decrease dramatically. As a result, I was unable to maintain my position in the north. Fearing that my enemies' clans would take advantage of my weakness, I was forced to abandon my profession and family in order to disappear without a trace. I could only travel to other parts of the state of Yu to look for a cure to help me regain my previous skills. As he was narrating, Dr. Mo became lost within his own story and tightly clenched his two fists. His fingernails dug into his palm, causing flesh blood to flow, but he did not notice this. Only his face revealed any expression, his teeth gnashed together, giving him a savage appearance. Dr. Mo's vicious expression could cause anyone who witnessed it to tremble in cold sweat, showing that he still harbored a bone-deep hatred for the despicable figure who poisoned him. Listening to the deep hatred within his words, Hanli could not help but feel goosebumps. A cold feeling began to rise within his heart. Heaven has eyes, and through some mysterious means, I came upon a strange book called Scripture of Longevity. I spent tremendous amounts of energy trying to understand it, and from reading it, I found a shortcut to recover my former martial prowess. I followed the steps, and Dr. Mo suddenly stopped, but his face betrayed him by showing anger and remorse. As a result, "You now look like a demon," said Hanli as he tried to help Dr. Mo complete his sentence. "That's correct. I didn't think that by following the steps within the book, I would regain my former powers at the cost of an accelerated aging into a prematurely aged old man that resembles a mixture between a human and a corpse." Dr. Mo sadly dropped his head and was too dejected to express any anger at Hanli's satiric comment. "By now, you should have found out the reason for your accelerated aging, right? It was because my method was inappropriate, causing evil chi to invade my body. For me, the energy consumed in a single day is equal to the energy needed to live 10 days as a normal human. As a result, I am constantly overtaxing my lifespan. Thankfully, I have proficiently trained in a skill to take care of my body and have followed the instructions in the book to concoct a secret medicine which decreases the speed of my aging, allowing me to last all these years. How does this chant I cultivate relate to your problem?" Hanli bluntly addressed the root of the problem. "Not long after I became the way I am now, I learned from the book of a method to solve this issue, and this is the eternal spring arts which you are practicing. I just need a practitioner that reached the 4th stage of the eternal spring arts to use his chi to massage and stimulate my secret acupoints. That will break me away from my current plight and will allow me to regain my lost life force. Why do you specifically need me? Can't you just find a random person to cultivate the chant?" Hanli muttered to himself for a moment, revealing a question that has been buried within himself for a long time. "Do you think this eternal spring arts technique can be cultivated by just any random person? This chant not only requires a young man to cultivate from an early age but also requires its cultivators to have a body that contains spiritual roots. Even though I don't know what spiritual roots are, I have looked through countless hundreds of disciples before you, all of which were incapable of cultivating the eternal spring arts technique," said Dr. Mo with an annoyed face. "It requires such conditions." Hanli stared blankly. He never thought that training in this chant would require such strict conditions. "In my last remaining months, I thought that I would never find someone who could cultivate the incantations, so I gave up and started to wander. I never thought that I would suddenly meet the sect leader of the 7 Mysteries sect, who was also being plotted against. As a similar individual suffering from similar circumstances, I gave a hand and saved the sect leader's insignificant life. Immediately, the sect leader invited me to the Seven Mysteries sect, where I became a valued member. I had planned on living the remainder of my life on the mountain, hidden in seclusion. Hey asterisk. But all of a sudden, a miracle happened. Originally, I was worried that my medicinal skills would not be passed on, so I invited the two of you into the valley to accept you two as my disciples. As luck would have it, on a whim, I let you two try to cultivate the Eternal Spring Arts incantation. Maybe it was because I was still holding on to a small bit of hope. But there seemed to be demons and gods at work since I suddenly let you two try out the Eternal Spring Arts incantation. In reality, even if you two had been unable to cultivate the incantation, I would have still accepted you guys as my disciples and bestowed upon you all of my medicinal knowledge, but I would never have thought that you would have a reaction to the incantation. Haha. It seems heaven never halts one's path to cultivation. Dr. Mo revealed all this in one breath, causing his face to look red from the lack of air. He appeared very pleased with his stroke of good fortune. I have not yet cultivated up to the fourth layer of the Eternal Spring Arts technique, so why did you stop me at this moment to discuss this matter with me? Hanli finally asked the question he was most concerned about. You only have yourself to blame for this. I spent so much blood and energy on you, yet you still cannot satisfy my demands, always playing tricks on me. You are only lacking this one last step, yet you choose to continue on slowly, unwilling to advance to the next layer. Originally, I was planning to wait another 2 years, but when I went down the mountains this time, I was recognized by a member of an enemy clan. Through an intense battle, even though I won and had killed my enemy, I consumed a significant amount of energy, which greatly shortened my lifespan. Even if I were to use all of my abilities, I would only be able to prolong my life for another year. How can I possibly wait any longer? Dr. Mo's originally proud expression vanished without a trace, replaced by a savage expression as he roared out at Hanli. After Hanli finished listening, his expression remained the same. He didn't reveal even a trace of being stirred. However, his heart was like a raging sea, which was completely different from his confident and unwavering appearance. Even though he knew from the beginning that Dr. Mo had been placing an unsettling importance on Hanli's cultivation, he never thought that there would be such an intense story behind this. Dr. Mo's identity and experience far surpassed the scope of his imagination.